Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. In today's video, we're going to take a look at two of the important reference work when it comes to the study of the New Testament. Now, if you want to study the religion of Christianity, we must always go back to the primary text. And the primary texts of the religion of Christianity are not the writings of the church fathers, are not the writings of Origen, of Eusebius, of Caesar. They're not the writings of Augustine. They are the writings that are found within the New Testament. The New Testament, as I've mentioned before in my previous video, it was first written in Koine Greek, meaning ancient Greek. It is not even classical Greek. It is Koine Greek, basically like marketplace Greek. And the earliest writings of the New Testament is actually the First Thessalonians, attributed to Paul, and a lot of scholars agree that this is actually Pauline, one of the authentic Pauline epistle. And no doubt First Thessalonians was probably written somewhere around the time 48-50 of the Common Era, and we have it in the New Testament. And it was written in Greek. Now there are certain theories as to whether Paul actually wrote this himself or he used the services of scribes. The latter would have been the more plausible, because in the ancient world, scribes actually, quote unquote scribes or servant actually. Paul doesn't have like a dedicated scribe. He had some travel companions and servants that actually wrote what he say. But no doubt scribes could have also been used to write or take dictation, at least whatever Paul say. And Paul is among one of the learned people of the past, but he's not like up there like Josephus, for example. But nevertheless, he is also still considered amongst the learned people of the past. Now, when we want to study the New Testament, obviously we have to learn its original language. The same way when we want to study the Quran, we have to study it in its original language. There are many ways on how to do this, and that is to actually learn through seminaries. But if you want to learn on your own, like for example, if you don't go to seminaries, or you don't go to madrasa, for example, you are too old to go to a madrasa, and so you might started late in your life about learning the religious scripture and things like that, and so you want to find a resource that you can actually use to study on your own. Now, I'll do a separate video for Islam, but for Christianity, obviously you need the Greek New Testament. But before that, I recommend you a great translation of the New Testament, and that is the NRSV. The NRSV is the academic. Now we have the NRSV UE, which is the updated edition. I have several comments about that updated edition, but I've not read it cover to cover to actually dedicate a video towards that. So I'll reserve it until I actually read cover to cover of the updated edition. But the NRSV, I do not have a dedicated NRSV, but I do use, you do not need to get what I have here, because you can find cheaper alternatives, like literally way cheaper. But the New Testament that I use, the NRSV, is based off Bart Ehrman's work, actually his compilation here, the New Testament and other early Christian writings. Now this is a great way, because you can actually see the New Testament as long as writings that falls within the same era. Okay, and so this is the book that I use. If you are more conservative, then you can use the NIV. Now, for many years, the NIV was actually my study or my go-to Bible. Hence, all the notes here that I have. By the way, these are all the contradictions, discrepancies that I found in the NIV, so I annotated. But if you are conservative, there's always something for everyone. The NIV, and no doubt I read the NIV, I quote the NIV in my videos, and I also have the KJV. Personally, I enjoy the language of the KJV, and also when I'm engaging with people, I always quote from the NKJV, because I realize that it is either these two Bibles that are the most popular one, the NKJV and the NIV. And once you start quoting using the NRSV, they'll not probably give you a lot of attention, because they don't agree with the NRSV, because they say it's very liberal, it's liberal translation. But actually it goes back to its primary text. Now, having said that, there's a lot of problems with the NRSV as well, and I've enumerated this in my previous video. That is why you need to go back to the Greek. Now, I'm not saying that I can read the Greek in the New Testament and I can understand every single word. That would take me more years. But nevertheless, you still need to attempt to read the New Testament in Greek, the same way as a Muslim would read the Quran in its actual Arabic. And if you read the New Testament in Greek using the correct Koine Greek pronunciation, obviously when you're reading to yourself, no one is actually cross-checking your pronunciation. So as long as you are able to sound Greek or Koine Greek, that should be good enough, because we are not there to argue in an academic at an academic conference and things like that. But you can use like a interlinear Bible that I have. It contains the Greek. It contains the Greek as well as the NRSV. Sorry, the NRSV is here. Let me just put it closer to you. The NRSV is here at the sides, and these are the literal translation. Now, even so, I have problems with the literal translation. Obviously, it is filled with theological bias, because every translation is filled with theological bias, with confessional and devotional bias. The same for the Quran as well. If you read the translation of the Quran published by Oxford University Press, and then if you read published by Darussalam, for example, there are stark contrasts. The one published by Oxford University Press adopted some of the views of the Sufi, the Maturidi, the Deobandi, and it doesn't always look at things from the Sunni perspective. Okay, and so does the NRSV. It puts into all these different denominations of Christianities and translate it that way. Now, there is one more book which I do not have, because I use it digitally, and that is the Nestle Allen 28 edition. The reason why I do not have it physically is because it is made of pig skin, and as a Muslim, I do not want to have anything to do with pig leather, so on and so forth. So I have no choice but to use it digitally. And a lot of people have thought that the textual commentary on the Greek New Testament, this is I used to think that this is actually made of pig skin, but this is actually an imitation leather. Okay, this is actually an imitation leather, so this is not a pig skin. There's a spider there. Let it go. Yeah, so this is not a pig skin. So now, if you do not know Greek, and you are still learning Greek, and then you know that translations are filled with theological bias, I'm gonna surprise you even further that even the textus receptus, or the text that the scholars have came up with, that they use to translate that they used to translate to English, the majority text, these are also filled with theological bias, and so readers should know that as well. While it does go through stringent methods of criticism as to go back to the primary text, but as works by Ehrman has shown, as well as Bediune has shown, that certain texts are definitely not what the ancient authors of the books within the New Testament actually wrote about. For example, the majority texts have harmonized the scene whereby the voice from heaven come out and say that you are my beloved son, today I have begotten you, whereas in Luke it says a completely different thing, and so the one that produced the majority text, they have actually harmonized this, even though it is found in the footnotes and things like that. But a lot of people do not read the footnotes, and moreover, a lot of Christians today do not actually read the critical edition of the Greek New Testament, yet alone actually learn Greek, yet alone liturgies are conducted in Greek. And I've done a survey of watching sermons on YouTube, and I've seen more music performances than actually quotations in Greek, reciting passages in Greek, reading the Psalms in Hebrew, reading the book of Daniel in Aramaic, and so people seems to want to have their liturgies in completely in English, and this is very different when we go to the Friday sermon. We do have Arabic quotations, especially of the Quran, especially of the Hadith, and then after the Arabic quotation, the Imam will give the translation. But I'm sure if I research further and watch more videos, I'll probably find. But yeah, there's one interesting video I watched on the Syrian Orthodox Church, and how they actually pray close to the way the Muslims pray, but they still their theology is still far, because they believe that Jesus is still the begotten Son of God, and that he was crucified. All Christians today believe that Jesus was crucified, and then this is completely against the Quran, and so this is definitely according to the Quran, an untrue statement to talk about. And also those who say that Jesus, the son of Mary, is Allah, those are the people that have definitely committed blasphemy, according to the Quran. So nevertheless, if we were to study the New Testament from a critical perspective, and we know that we have a problem here, and the problem is that if we read it in English, we know that the translation is filled with theological bias. And then even if we read it in Greek, we know that even the ones who produce the majority text are also have also been affected by theological bias. Now, I should make a disclaimer here that I do not intend to say that these people were actually dishonest. Okay, in fact, they were not. In fact, they're more succumb to theological bias, because you don't know who produced the NIV, the committee of the NIV, you don't know who, but the NRSV, at least you know that some of these people are actually devotional Christians, they're confessional Christians, and so in certain passages here and there, they do let their theological bias actually slip through. Like I've given an example before, the word proskuneo, when used, when it is not when used not by the disciples of Jesus towards Jesus, it is rendered as homage. Like the wise men from the east, they came to pay Jesus homage. But when it is being used as the disciple, then it is to worship him. Like for example, the end of the Lucan passage, whereby Jesus ascended up to heaven, the disciples worship him. That passage clearly should have been translated as rendered as homage, but there's a certain word play here, even though it could mean both, proskuneo, it could mean both, but if we put it in the first century context, or whereby Jesus was a Jew doesn't worship a man, and so this verse have been completely taken out of context when the translators of the NRSV translated it. So now we have the New Testament here, and so what do we do with it? We need to improve our learning of the Greek, and for that we need to turn to books published by scholars. And so which book do we turn to? There's so many. Now I'm not claimed to have read many of these Greek resource, but the lower classic library, you can go to there. You'll find writings by ancient Greeks, theologians, philosophers, the classic lower library by Harvard University. Again, these resources are available online, just need to know where to find them. Obviously I'll not tell you where to find them, but they are online, but obviously the much better thing to do and the more honorable thing to do is to actually pay for these works, because the people who translated these works and compiled them, it took them their entire life even, and so especially scholars producing works like the New Testament, they dedicated their entire life to studying this and to producing this work. And so if you just want to go to a certain website and then just downloaded it for free, then that is something that you should reconsider. Now, unless you do not have the funds to do so, then unless you also do not have the means, then obviously people will do things when they are people will do certain things when they do out of other choices. But nevertheless, the most honorable thing to do is to actually to purchase these books. And so we for learning of the Greek language, I should have better prepared this, but basics of biblical grammar. This is by Bill Mounts, an evangelist. Okay, I use works by evangelists. I use works by all sorts of people. I don't discriminate, even though I disagree with them. But the Quran says, "Lakum dinukum waliyadin." I'm just here to take the knowledge that they have to offer, and the rest it is between them and God. So one good thing about Mounts that I found is that it does contain a few lexicons, okay, and vocabs at the back, which is useful for you, for myself especially, some vocabs here and there, and also because it explained the way it teaches Greek from the way an English people will actually learn languages. Okay, maybe there's a better way to word it, but it talks about what is a noun, what is an adjective, what is a preposition. Okay, and so it refreshes your mind, because we learned this in primary school, and so sometimes we had forgotten what a noun is, and so it reminds us of what it is and how do we view it, and things like that. So this is a great resource. There's an online class for this as well, available on YouTube. Again, if you Google it, but if you go to Mount's website, you can purchase the course. The next one is the Strong Concordance. I've reviewed this before. The Strong Concordance is very, very important, because you need to be able to see the amount of quotations that are found within the New Testament. And obviously this includes the Hebrew Bible as well. For example, the word proskuneo, how many times does it occur, and what does it mean every time it occurs? And so even though this is referencing the NKJV, because the NRSV wasn't there when Strong wrote it, when Strong actually came out with this work. But nevertheless, you at the back here you have Vine's dictionary, okay, which is one of the great old dictionary of the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible. It is not a complete dictionary, but nevertheless you still have some lexicons down there. The only problem with using references and resource like this physically instead of digitally is that you cannot just Command F or Control F and search a word. You have to go through bit by bit, and then it actually slows you down. But nevertheless, I still find pleasure in actually learning the ancient way. The Apostle Paul, for example, he must have, obviously he was using a scroll, but because Codex was invented by Christian monks in the 2nd and 3rd century in Syria. But while Paul was in Asia Minor, there are two things: either he remembered these verses from memory, or he actually brought probably some scrolls with him whereby he would just refer to. And Origen would have, by the time of Origen, we would already have a codex, meaning a book, and so Origen must have been flipping the papyri, and so to find quotations here and there. And so there are a lot of beauty in learning things the old way physically, and even though for resource I would actually much prefer using it digitally, but then again, the price of having a physical copy of this and the price for paying it digitally is not much of a difference. I find it more justifiable to actually have the physical copy. So I have the physical copy. Now obviously this is something that you will not take with you to debates if you ever engages with, in one. And so these are works that you should prepare beforehand, unless you have quote unquote a slave to follow, to assist you with all of this. Before I conclude, there's one more thing that is very important, and that is you need a lexicon. And you do not want a modern Greek lexicon. That is actually detrimental to your study of Koine Greek, because these are first century Greek, and so you need a first century Koine Greek dictionary, but there's no such thing, and so you do have to use something much later that projected back. And sometimes that when you project back, you are being anachronistic or so. And so none of these lexicons are actually perfect. And in fact, we do not even know some of these Greek words. What does it even mean in our modern context? Because we do not have like a tradition whereby every single word of Koine Greek is actually being translated or being passed down generations to generations. There's no isnad to that. And so scholars had to actually reconstruct what Koine Greek might first sound like and what it could mean by reading through the vast literatures of ancient and classical Greek up until the 1400s or so. Again, I'm not saying that I've read all the lexicons in the world, but the very famous one is the Walter Bauer lexicon, and this is the third edition of BDAC. You can find these literatures online. If you do not have the means, you do not really need to buy them. This edition is by the University of Chicago Press. University of Chicago Press. And this is about 1,000 page long. And so, for example, just give you a brief example of my learning on how I learn. Is, for example, if I come across a passage within the Greek New Testament, for example, if I come across a passage and for example the word logos, it means word, for example, but suppose I do not know that, and so I would go to the Vine's dictionary, go to the lexicon, and then also go to the Concordance and see when it's been used, and to see whether the word logos had actually been translated as word consistently or not. And that is how I found the word proskuneo had not been translated consistently, and Bidun also pointed this out. And so it is actually interesting to embark in this study. Obviously it takes a long time. It takes a lot of your hours after work. For example, if you're working 8 to 5 or 9 to 6, it does take up a lot of your time. But nevertheless, if you do it consistently over a period of 10 years, for example, you have a lot of knowledge. And like Sheikh Ahmad Didat used to say, that whatever you have, whatever small knowledge that Allah had granted you, you should use it, and then Allah will add to it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the most knowledgeable. He mentions in the Quran that if we were to use the entire ocean as ink to write the words of Allah, you will never, even if Allah adds another ocean to it, it will never be finished. You will never be able to finish writing the words of Allah. And so the knowledge of Allah is vast, and Allah is the one who grants us knowledge. So from one word proskuneo, you discover this thing, that there is discrepancies here and there, and then you also read the renderings. Has the word been translated consistently across the different translations of the Bible? For example, like the word Bereshit, the Bereshit phrase in Genesis, is it translated as the NRSV, like when God began to create, or in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth? And these are two completely different way to interpret a verse. And the JPS Tanakh translated, I don't want to misquote it, but it translated as when God began to create the heavens and the earth. By the way, this is the JPS Tanakh. This also contains the Hebrew word. Contains the Hebrew. Yeah, but Hebrew is another thing. If you know how to read Arabic, you'll know how to read Hebrew. But if you know how to read Arabic, that doesn't mean you'll know how to read Greek, because they're completely different language. Arabic and Hebrew are like brother and sister. Yeah, when God began to create heaven and earth, okay, and so learning never stops. Learning continues on, and then also, once I've looked at the concordance, I've looked at the different translations, I also go to the textual commentaries and see what textual scholars have to say about this, what is added here, and what are the earliest attested to witnesses to this, and why scholars do not actually go with that renderings, and why do they actually in the majority text they use a different how do I even say it? They use a different text from different manuscripts of the Bible, of the New Testament, and just get behind that thought process. And then once you get behind that thought process, you start to realize that, oh, this person is actually bounded by theological bias, because in certain other passages he rendered it this way, and in certain other passages he rendered things differently. And so you start to see that the inconsistencies there. Now, some of these inconsistencies are deliberate, because if you want to translate Greek to English word for word, that is an impossibility. It's the same way as you try to translate every single Arabic word, just a single word in English or in another language. It is impossible, because first and foremost, no one speaks Koine Greek today. And then no one speaks the Quranic Arabic today, and so that is why you do need to understand that it is not plausible to translate word for word, which is why certain brackets, certain words brackets are introduced. For example, in the Arabic example, the word alif lam, for example, and the word Rasul, it gives it a definite article, whereby the word Rasul basically means a messenger. Whereas if you add the alif lam, and because there's a ra there, it becomes ar-rasul. Okay, it's not al-rasul, ar-rasul, and so it becomes the messenger. For example, theos basically means a god. Okay, but if you put the word ha there, which is the, it becomes ha theos, it becomes the god. And ha theos in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, okay, in the Septuagint, it is always referred to as Yahweh, okay, or the Tetragrammaton Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So once you start learning all this, you add to it, and then you can sit at a dinner table and educate your friends. So anyway, I digress. Yeah, so all these books are amazing. You do not need to have them physically. They are resources made available online, but then again, I prefer to have them physically, even though that means that I'll have problems when I shift house in the future, or when I move somewhere else. But most probably, if I ever were to do that, I'll have to turn to the digital copy, because as far as I'm concerned, these books are not going anywhere, because I'm not the only one using them. Family members are also using them, and so I can't bring them all with me. And so this will be like a library within a house that I need to frequent. But nevertheless, I foresee that I'll start building up my own library in a different house if I do move. But yeah, so that is one of the things that you need to think about. Like, how do you manage all these literatures? Yeah, I mean, if you have 50, it is still considered a lot. If you have 5, yeah, you can pack everything in a box. But if you have like 500, for example, or 1,000, my cousin, she has I don't know, probably 1,000 book, and so and so yeah, I can only understand how she feel when she moves somewhere else. So, but anyway, digitalized copy is definitely the way to go forward. But I would still prefer books like this, whereby I found joy in flipping through pages, drinking some tea, some coffee, and then just learn on Sunday morning. Yeah, the classical way to learn. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking around with me, and hopefully you benefit from all these videos that I made, and learn something from it. But just know that whenever you learn something, you have to apply it, because like Imam Al-Ghazali say, I believe Imam Al-Ghazali say, please correct me if I'm wrong, that knowledge without application is actually useless. It is a waste of time. And so whatever you learn, you have to pass it on, because if you just learn and then keep it to yourself, 10 years down the road you're gonna forget, and then it'll just be a waste of time that you actually learn and then you forget, because I mean that's just like throwing money down the drain. You do not pass the money to someone else, instead you throw it down the drain, and so it's a waste of resources, a waste of time, and also it's a waste of the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon you, His mercy, and all these the nikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should always remember that He has made it possible for YouTube, for example, for us to learn cohesively, and also as individuals. Everything comes from Allah, and everything shall return back to Him. And so we should always be grounded, and we shouldn't say that we are humble. We should say that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us humility. And ladies and gentlemen, yeah, any mistakes is my own, and all goodness comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.